We start with a young Philip Schofield cosplaying as Draco Malfoy. I mean David Bowie, telling us all about his attic for some reason, and how he once met a real snowman who gave him a scarf. And before you can say, someone called the local loony bin because that Ziggy Stardust fella's having a proper mental breakdown live on Channel 4, we cut to the opening titles, where everything becomes animated but with a dodgy frame rate. Anyway, we then channel the energy of Gary Glitter and zoom into a random boy's bedroom, because reasons, where he's totally excited to see the most snow since his dad ran routes in Mallorca for Big Dave and the East End crew. So he hurriedly gets changed whilst the animators show us his bare bottom because he then runs past his mustachioed dad, what used to love the snuff, and is so eager to play in the white stuff that he forgets his shoes and socks. Just like my girlfriend, who gets so excited for the white stuff that her underwear pops off. But, yeah, that's a very different video. Anyway, his mum then tries to make him cosplay as Tim Pool by sticking a beanie on him, because it's friggin' freezing out there, and also because she don't want the neighbours to know he's a ginger. But he don't want to be no Tim stinking Pool, and so abandons the beanie before she can say, well, luckily I know a small bald Asian who totally appreciates good headwear. Now, because this is set in the 80s and before they had smartphones or even Call of Duty, he entertains himself by running around in circles and molesting innocent tree branches and shit. But he spoils himself when he lobs a snowball at his own window and his mum comes out and gives him a right bollocking, but silently because it turns out this entire family is fucking mute for some reason. So he walks off feeling sorry for himself and has no mates to even have a kickabout with because his dad was totally a notorious drug runner and had to move his family out to the middle of nowhere to hide from the London filth. So he sets about making a snowman because, as we've already established, things like TikTok and Pornhub ain't been invented yet, so what else you gonna do in 80s rural England? Anyway, he gives his Frankenstein creation a face and some buttons but no shirt, and also a potbelly but no cock. So I guess this snowman is actually a gender non-conforming snow individual of indeterminate gender. Wowzers! 80s Channel 4 was so ahead of its time. Anyway, the little Ginge is so excited about finally having a motionless static playmate to hang about with that he struggles to sleep that night, tossing and turning while sweating more buckets than his dad whenever he hears a police siren whilst watching the Sweeney.
Oh shit!
So he gets out of bed and looks out the window at his new friend, who's already turned his back on the ginger nut. But magically, at the stroke of midnight, the cockless non-binary snow fella totally comes to life by the power of disco, or sparkles or something. So the kid rushes down to greet his anthropomorphic Frankenstein creation, what he made out of rolled up mushy ice and has now come to life because reasons. But unfortunately, he forgot to give him vocal cords, so now he's fucking mute and all. Which means if it's bothered about pronouns, it's going to have to mime them to us. Though, for the sake of convenience, I'm sticking with male. Mainly because I ain't seen a woman that podgy since my Aunt Margie's legs swelled up with excess water retention. Anyway, he doffs his cap to him and shakes his hand. And I'm honestly a bit surprised as to how chill he seems to be. Personally, the first thing I'd be wanting to know is why this ginger git gave me a fucking potbelly but no chappy. At least stick a carrot down there for fuck's sake. So instead of running away screaming like a normal person would when the little snowman you made out of random clumps of frost suddenly starts giving out handshakes, he invites this strange being into his home and cruelly sits the creature made of literal ice beside a roaring fire.
Why?
Where this fat white bloke gets rejected by a pussy, and probably not for the last time. Luckily, as a ginger, this kid is well used to it by now. So after playing with his balls and ringing his bell, steady, he gets programmed by the TV to renounce his white privilege and ominously stares into the fire like he's going to top himself in shame and guilt of the sins of his ancestors. But the boy snaps him out of it and says, no, that's exactly why the BBC is banned it, Algaff, before taking him into the kitchen and messing around with a light switch and probably racking up a shit ton of wonga on the energy bills.
Bruh.
Well, what do you expect? It was made in the 80s, and before that grumpy Funberg lass was even a twinkle in her mum's clunge. And there was no Extinction Rebellion peeps to educate them on the climate emergency by gluing themselves to the middle of the M40. So how could they possibly know about the consequences of wasting lights and shit? Anyway, they then sneak up to his parents' room, where this creepy snow fella tries to touch up his dad through the covers. Not a joke. And because he got brainwashed by leftist propaganda earlier when the kid accidentally switched from the BBC to CNN and landed on old reruns of Brian's Delta, the snow fella then tries to look more like his chubby baldy idol by putting foundation on his cheeks and totally starting to drag up, like all the cool kids apparently now tend to do. So the kid drags him out and takes him into his playroom, where his mate's dancing is so bad that he ends up trashing the place and almost knocking himself out in the process. Realising he can't take this clumsy numpty anywhere, they go back outside, and because he's watched too much Mission Impossible : Fallout, he then cosplays as that Thomas Cruise fella and does all sorts of crazy motorbike stunts whilst terrifying the local wildlife. And before you can say, why is this kid now sniffing his ass, they come back home to find he's now more greasy than Ron Jeremy flipping burgers in prison, and so the kid puts him into some sort of fridge freezer thing in the garage. Or some shit. But there he finds a random pick of some trees, and so naturally, the Snowman fella straight up kidnaps a ginger and flies off with him, because reasons. While some random Welsh choir boy starts singing the wettest orchestral song since literally any other Welsh orchestral song. They float over the village before suddenly, loads more snowmen in little hats come to life and join them in the air. And before you can say, these fucking migrants are now coming in from the bleeding sky, they go and sod off, and the main characters are now soaring over the sea, whilst gaslighting a poor posh bloke into thinking he's having a fucking breakdown seeing a live snowman holding a small ginger 300 feet above his cruise ship, and just stares at his champagne bottle and thinks, well, it's finally happened, Colin, and it's straight to the Priory for you on Monday morning, my boy. Somehow, though, these fellas then end up over the North Pole and scaring the F out of some dopey penguins, also because reasons. A little later, they land in a dark forest and soon discover the anthropomorphic Frankenstein snowman's native homeland, complete with more silly hats and a Pharrell gig.
Bruh.
And where an old smelly fat man in a red suit and giant beard sits waiting for him. And before you can say, this better not be the polar version of Epstein Island, the snow fellas all start fiddling, steady, and playing all sorts of instruments whilst prancing around and eating cake. And how anthropomorphic Frankenstein-y ice fellas can possibly have a functioning digestive system or a pancreas to process that amount of sugar, I don't know. Anyway, after having a right old knees up and a more happening hootenanny than a Jules Holland gig on New Year's Eve, the weird fat man takes the kid into his shed to show him his special toys. Or some shit. But after stroking the wrong kind of nozzle, the dodgy fat bloke tells him to sod right off if he ain't gonna put out. And so they fly on home, and thankfully this time without bothering any more boozed up pissheads.
You can see right through me. Can you read my mind? You belong in the sky. You and I could belong to each other.
And instead of asking how the fuck this thing can defy the laws of gravity when it's made out of frozen water, the boy just hugs him and goes to bed. The next morning, the kid runs past his mute parents again to find the son has made his best friend a midget, and also dead. But at least he now has two balls, so I guess he was a fella all along. And we end with a poor ginger preteen crying all alone over the corpse of his only friend in the world, before the final credits start playing, in the darkest ending since I ran over that blind fella last year. And that's it. That's the plot, and that's a lot. Though I'm surprised Channel 4 is allowed to screen this every year, given it's chock full of disinformation. Like, why is this fella singing about walking in the air when they're clearly flying? And how were they allowed to travel to other countries without even having a COVID booster? I can't even get into Canada without border police shoving multiple pricks up my arse. And didn't Russia once claim part of the North Pole? If so, then that's pretty reckless of that snow fella to take a small child all the way up there. I mean, the last peeps to enter Russian airspace without authorisation got a rocket shoved up their plane's poop chute. But anyway, I digress. Consider ringing that bell thing so you don't miss any future recaps. Say Merry Christmas to everyone in the comments if you have time, and I'll see you in the new year.